Hello, this is Angelia, and you're listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. We were talking about standard deviations on the bell curve and how you got to be careful because normal's here and your deviations come here. But if you're looking at a certain population, say if everyone got irradiated, that would be the normal. And the people who didn't and are safe are now a deviation. So normal's not always good when you use that method. So we're going to take up on talking about a little more of that again. The major limitations of the statistical model is its inability to accord any value to the social and psychological impact of behaviors. And as we all know, when it comes to mental health, that's the number one teller. The behavior that you exhibit. That's how people know there's something not quite right going on. And there's degrees. You can start out as, someone who's a little unique, someone who's a little eccentric, and then go all the way up to, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. All abhorrent behaviors are not created equal. Dangerous deviations are lumped together with harmless or desirable ones. Because, like I said, me and my kids have talked about different things that are valued nowadays. When I was growing up, being smart was valued. It's kind of funny to be dumb nowadays. So, there's a big difference there. If behaviors with negative consequences, such as reckless driving and alcoholism, become widespread enough, they would be, by definition, statistically normal. So again, just because something might be statistically normal doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. So you got to watch your group that you're pulling on this. Likewise, statistically rare behavior, such as fluency in several foreign languages and artistic creativity, would become deviant. And there are sections of society who believe that's the case now anyway. So, being smart is not looked upon as something good in these areas, nor being creative. So, that's a shame. But like I say, you got to watch your populace that you're polling. Given those problems, we shall question the viability of the statistical model. Because again, in some instances you can use it, in some not so much. Its simplicity and the importance of standard distribution in theorizing about behavior account for its continued use. Because it's easy. That's the thing there. It's easy. And that's why some lazy scientists will fall back on it, because it's easy. But we need to be sensitive to its potential misuse, as in when you start labeling all of this group is deviant, all of that group is deviant, and that's not the case. Most people are, in the middle of this, and then there are people who fall to the left and the right, but most of us are in the middle, and, you can't start labeling a whole group as something. That's a generalization, and it's not true. The biological model. The biological approach simply assumes that all organisms, including humans, have biologically natural functions: eating, sleeping, growing, adapting, reproducing, and so on. And that when something interferes with these functions, an abnormal state develops. Because living beings like our homeostasis. We like the status quo. We like comfort. We like to be in that comfortable area of life. And when things happen that knock us out of our comfortable area, we do our best to fight and get back to our comfortable area. So living creatures are very oriented towards their status quo. Like physical illness, abnormality is seen as a deviation from the structural and functional integrity of the body and its workings. According to the biological model, an ordinary behavior, such as the consumption of alcohol, is labeled abnormal when it becomes self-destructive. Thus, the family enjoying some wine during Passover and the alcoholic on the street are at different points on the normal-abnormal continuum. Because, they're having a normal behavior. This is wine with dinner. That's something a lot of people do. The guy out on the street passed out, that's not normal. A central concept in the biological model is that of homeostasis, the inherent tendency of an organism to maintain balance among its many internal units and systems. Because like I said, we like that status quo. Living creatures like our little homeostasis, our little comfort zone. As long as such equilibrium exists, survival of the individual and therefore of the species is more probable. Because happy creatures will breed. Some biologically oriented writers take this point of view even further. They argue that living organisms also strive to maintain an equilibrium with their environments that guarantees the food supply, fresh air, shelter, and other factors required for a steady internal state. So, that tells you right there that organisms who upset the food supply, your fresh air, your shelter, and other factors required for a steady internal state is abnormal. That is self-detrimental and detrimental. Say if it was a country and someone was doing these things, that would be detrimental to the citizens of your country. So that's not normal. And in a lot of cases, when that's going on, it's all about greed. It's all about lining the pockets of the guys who are doing all the lovely polluting because they don't care. They got their big places with AC and plenty of food and water. They can afford water filters and things. They don't care about the little guy who has to deal with their consequences. So, yeah, that's not normal. Therefore, both the internal functioning of living organisms and their interaction with the environment can be regarded as either normal or abnormal, depending on whether or not homeostasis is achieved. And, I've heard some bad talking, about Native Americans and people who make sure that there is a balance with nature. They only take what they need. They use everything they take. And there's replanting and things. But this is actually a very wise and normal way of being. According to this approach, a multitude of behaviors clearly fall into the abnormal category. Oh, yes, they do. Overeating and undereating, not sleeping, and sleeping too much, exercising too little, and over-exercising. And, of course, we all know about bulimia and anorexia. These are just a few of the physical behaviors that can put the body off balance. And we all know when we're off balance. Most of us can feel it. And we know what happened to get us there. So, at that point, it's a matter of correcting it. Not getting adequate love and attention. Not getting adequate love and attention is an abnormality. Some people don't even think about that, don't feel that that's the case, but that's true. All growing living beings need love and attention. Or mourning too long over a loss can create a psychological imbalance, and it certainly can. I mean, you look at some of these kids who are going off shooting other kids and everything. They've been bullied. They've not had a great home life probably. They don't get into that on the TV. But there are problems there. And again, if you grieve too long for someone, it can keep you from living, the rest of your life. The notion that any behavior deviating from biological standards is abnormal appears to be simple, but it is rather difficult to put into practice. Because, again, depending on the population you're looking at, what's normal for one group is abnormal for another. What's abnormal for one group is normal for another. How can we determine which behaviors are biologically normal? Well, if they happen in nature, then that's usually normal. Observation of humans and other animals provides very contradictory data, because we have these big brains and we use them, whereas the animals have lesser brains for the most part. So we're not going to react the way an animal reacts. If we set a norm for heartbeats per minute, how do we categorize the low rates of superb athletes? Because athletes have a lower heart rate, and it's because their heart is stronger because they exercise so much, so that it needs to work less hard. It is normal to eat the flesh of other animals or to drink fermented grape juice. In some cases, yes. For everyone, maybe not. What about having more than one mate or being sexually stimulated by a person of the same gender? Well, I believe humans are meant to be monogamous. We're like the wolves or some bird species that mate for life. I personally think that's right. Sometimes stuff is problematic, but I believe that because have love. Humans have deep love and affection. Normally, there are people who have problems, and they will hop around from one person to another, and being attracted to a person of the same gender, well, that happens in nature. So if it happens in nature, it's natural. Despite such drawbacks, the biological model has strong supporters. There are many who argue against homosexuality on the grounds that only cross-gender sexuality is biologically appropriate, and also some people on religious grounds. But none of us are living back in Leviticus. If you're living back in Leviticus, you'd be stoning everybody that walks by, and even yourself, probably on a daily basis. So Jesus came so that we didn't have to do all that anymore. So you need to listen to those red words and go with those. And that any deviation from this path is automatically abnormal. And again, it all depends on the group you're in. These proponents tend to overlook the considerable evidence indicating that many animals engage in homosexuality. Because like I said, they do. I knew a new man had a gay bull, a new man had a gay dog. So again, if it happens in nature, it's natural. Perhaps the greatest value of the biological model is in its reminder that we should examine the adaptive consequences of our behavior much more closely than we do. And boy, is that true for some people. They have no moderation, no behavior checks and balances, no filter, and that's a problem. Because in a civilized society, we're supposed to be polite and nice to each other, and not always say the first thing that comes to mind, or be impulsive when we're dealing with others. So yeah, it is a problem. It is difficult to disagree with the argument that knowingly harmful biological actions should be seen as negative, because they are. If you're a danger to yourself or others, that's one of the first things psychologists are going to look at is, are you dangerous? Are you going to hurt yourself, or are you going to hurt somebody else? And if the answer on that is yeah, then that's a problem. After all, who favors poor nutrition, obesity, alcoholism, and other self-destructive behaviors? Well, usually only mentally ill people, right? At the same time, however, how many of us can resist stuffing ourselves at a holiday feast? Not me. So, most of us can't. Or drinking a little too much at a party on occasion. And in my 20s, I did that on more than one occasion. I think most of us have. The disease model. The disease approach, an offshoot of the biological model, states that deviations from the homeostasis normal state are best regarded as illnesses and should therefore be treated as medical problems. Now, there's some problems with that, because you can't compare apples and oranges. Mental problems might be the apple, and medical problems might be the orange. And unless you're going to squish them together and make some kind of weird apple-orange juice, it doesn't always cross over. If this model that currently dominates abnormal psychology is given us such terms as mental illness, psychological problems such as schizophrenia and the affective disorders do seem to fit that model, at least in part, because we know schizophrenia is not something that can be cured, it can't be treated, and so some people might want to just label it as a medical disease, and it can be in some cases. So, excuse me, most of the time it is biological. You're born with it, it presents later in life, and there's really not much they can do except treat symptoms. However, a number of other serious conditions, such as phobias, compulsions, and alcoholism, do not. And now there is a component in alcoholism that is biological. Take alcoholism as a case in point. Although there is no question that alcoholism has strong physiological components, what do we gain by calling it a disease? The evidence for a purely biological explanation for why some people began to drink too much is slim. Psychological and social factors appear to play a much more important role. Peer pressure, escapism. Labeling this problem as a disease has had the benefit of alcoholics who are now more likely to be taken to a hospital than to jail. So I'm sure we used to watch Andy Griffith, and poor Otis was in jail for getting drunk. He needed to be in rehab. And that's the case, with a lot of people. They don't need to be in a jail if they're drug addicts or alcoholics. They need to be in a rehab. And mental ill people don't need to be in jail for that. They need to be in a place where they can get some help. But it does little to enlarge our understanding of this widespread condition. Another problem with the disease model is the shortage of supporting evidence in the diagnosis of a condition. According to this approach, mental disorders are a subset of medical diseases that have primarily behavioral manifestations. And of course, we know that's not always the case. In medical diseases, the behavioral manifestations, such as delirium from a high fever, are supported by independent evidence of some underlying organic disease process, such as bacteria found in a throat culture. When the disease model is applied to psychological problems, there is no such secondary evidence because, there's no physical reason why someone might be mentally ill. Thus, when we say that Arnold is withdrawn because he is schizophrenic, we have no evidence beyond his visible symptoms to support the notion that a disease is in progress. Indeed, to argue that Arnold is withdrawn because he is a schizophrenic amounts to circulative reasoning, since we already have labeled him schizophrenic because he is withdrawn. And certainly not all people who are shy or withdrawn have schizophrenia. Most of them do not. Perhaps the strongest opponent of the disease model has been psychiatrist Thomas Szasz. Szasz insists that no disease process is involved in most maladaptive behavior. Because that's true. Most maladaptive behavior is from mental illness and has no physical cause. Rather, the patient has problems in living. And that's, as easy a way as you can say that. They have problems in living that are manifesting themselves as behavioral deviations from society's norm. And there can be so many reasons for that. And most of the time it goes back to how your life started out, how it continued, and where it is now. Szasz contends that what we have been calling symptoms are best seen as patients' communications about themselves and their world. because abhorrent behavior is telling you there's a problem. There's a problem somewhere in this person's life, and their world has not been good. So it's a cry for help. And, if more people had less stigma about saying, oh, okay, she's crazy, he's weird, yeah, okay. Then they say, hey, I noticed this, what's going on, and then maybe that might open in a door to getting the person to getting some help. Rather than the result of some underlying organic process, Saz sees abnormal behavior as purposive, as the necessary and inevitable result of the tensions between individuals and the society in which they live. Because, a child who grows up in an abusive or neglectful home is going to have a very different outlook on life than a child who grew up in a supportive, safe environment. That's just a fact of life. So, all lives are not created equal. And when people start showing abhorrent behavior, like I say, it's a cry for help. They're telling you, hey, my life is not awesome, it's not great, and I could use some help here. To regard such behaviors as something other than problems in living removes from patients the obligation to be responsible, because you are responsible for your own behavior. There's not a time when you're not. With serious mental illnesses, yeah, there can be some times where people are out of control, but like I say, it all boils down to the fact that you are responsible for your own behavior. And if you're doing stuff that is not right, and if you're doing stuff to other people that is not right, or to yourself, then that is something you need to look at and adjust. And to be seen as responsible for their own behaviors, because ultimately you are responsible for your own behavior. It is not in vogue right now to be responsible for your own behavior. There's all these Karens and Kevins running around behaving on everybody else, me, mine, yeah, whatever. So, you are responsible for your own behavior, whether you want to be or not. And people are going to judge you on your behavior, whether you want them to or not. So, keep that in mind. And I hope that's helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program. And that's what it is, an educational program. It is not designed to diagnose or treat any mental health issues. If anything in this educational program has triggered you, or you think it might be something that you need to look into, then by all means contact your mental health professional. Thanks for watching or listening. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. That's all for now. Until next time.